Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something captured by the title Overthinking Out Loud.
Right. And what's really interesting here is that we have source material describing, well, two quite distinct projects that share that exact name.
Exactly. So there's this blog, and it's described as offering light philosophical reflections on daily matters, you
Yeah.
know?
And then there's also a podcast, which is just labeled Personal Journals.
So quite different vibes on the surface.
hmm
Our mission then in this deep dive is really to unpack the key insights, the main ideas presented in these sources.
Yeah, we want to explore the different ways people might actually overthink out loud, based, of course, only on the material we have.
And don't worry, we'll guide you through everything we've found. Shall we jump in?
Let's do it. Okay, so we start with the blog. It's titled Overthinking Out Loud, and it's by someone named Ido Fleishon.
Right. And the source frames it as a place for philosophical reflections, covering a whole range of topics.
hmm And the first specific one from the blog that really caught our eye asked this question: how can computer science be fascinating?
Which is a great question because, coding can seem pretty dry from the outside.
Exactly. And the post actually opens with that. It mentions the author's partner being puzzled, sort of wondering how someone finds pleasure spending days looking at, quote, dull lines of code.
Yeah, lacking beauty nor a whisper of a thrill, I think was the phrase used.
Right. And the source does acknowledge that perspective. The author agrees. It's not the same kind of feeling as, say, going for a walk or a hug or dancing.
Sure, those are great for their own reasons, as the blog notes. CS isn't trying to replace them.
Precisely. So the question becomes, if it's not that kind of thrill, where does the fascination come from, according to the author?
Okay, yeah, what's the blog's take?
Well, this is where it gets pretty interesting. The author suggests the fascination with computer science actually stems from using it as a tool to explore the nature of our universe.
Whoa, okay, that's a big claim. From lines of code to the universe.
It is. It definitely reframes the whole thing. The source contrasts this with the partner's comment about, like, not knowing the meaning of existence.
Right.
And the author sort of posits that, okay, maybe we can't know the ultimate source of everything, but we can make discoveries about the universe's fundamental nature.
And that's the hook for computer science.
That's the argument presented in the blog post,
Yeah.
yes. That CS becomes this lens, this method for that kind of fundamental exploration. That's where the deep interest lies.
So it's less about the code itself and more about what the process of coding, maybe the logic, can reveal about, well, reality.
You got it. That seems to be the core idea. And then the blog gives a concrete example, too.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
The specific one mentioned is trying to improve an AI solution, something designed to solve the 2048 game.
Okay.
And even that task, which sounds pretty specific, is framed within this larger context of, like, probing universal concepts.
Huh. That's a really fascinating way to look at coding. Okay, so from the abstract world of CS, the blog then shifts focus. It turns to something, well, fundamental to us, language.
Right. There's a piece asking, how can German affect cognition?
And this starts from personal experience, doesn't it? The author learning German.
Yeah, after moving to Germany, the source points out that, okay, sure, lots of people in Berlin speak English, but learning German is presented as really crucial.
Not just for, like, ordering coffee, but for deeper stuff.
Exactly, for genuine cultural integration, for understanding the cultural intricacies, as the source puts it.
Okay, and this personal starting point then opens up into that bigger discussion.
Yeah.
The link between language and thought itself, which the source notes is highly debatable.
Very debatable. Yeah, it's a huge topic in philosophy and linguistics. And the blog post presents one particular approach to this debate, just one view.
And what is that specific view it outlines?
So this perspective sees language pretty purely as just a representation of our thoughts and, a tool for communication.
Okay, so like the thoughts happen first, independently, almost fully formed.
That's the idea in this view, yeah. Cognition exists on its own, and language is just the vehicle we use to transfer that meaning, those already existing thoughts, to someone else.
Right, so language doesn't really shape the thought itself in this specific model.
Exactly. According to this perspective described in the blog, language is simply a means to an end moving meaning. It's not seen as shaping the speaker's fundamental cognition. It's described quite plainly as a tool at our disposal.
Gotcha. And it's really important, like you said, to remember this is just one perspective the blog is presenting on a very complex, ongoing debate.
Absolutely. It's just one take within that whole conversation.
Okay. Makes sense. Let's shift gears again. Another topic the blog dives into is long-term travel. The piece is called The Essence of Adventure, a conversation between a horse and its rider.
Yeah, this one draws on the author's own pretty extensive experience backpacking the world for, I think, 16 months.
Uh,
And the source notes how travelers often talk very openly about all the good stuff, right? The merits of long-term travel.
oh, yeah, absolutely. We hear about the amazing sights, the cultures, the freedom, personal growth, all that jazz.
Totally. That's the standard narrative.
Yeah.
But this blog post zeroes in on something less discussed, maybe even a bit counterintuitive.
Which is,
The choice to actually end the adventure.
interesting, because usually travel stories end because, well, you run out of money, or you have to go back to school or a job, right? External things.
Exactly. What's insightful here, presented in the blog, is this idea that you can travel for so long that the adventure part, well, it kind of fades and maybe becomes meaningless in that specific sense, or it just becomes your normal lifestyle.
Okay.
And when you reach that point, the source suggests the ending doesn't have to be forced by circumstance, like running out of cash or hitting a deadline.
Yeah.
It can come from a deliberate choice.
So the journey concludes not because you hit some external wall, but because you decide, okay, this adventure chapter is done. I'm ready for something else.
Precisely that. The blog frames it as reaching this sort of internal conundrum,
Yeah.
maybe, that leads to finishing the travels in a most satisfying way, crucially, out of choice and not out of circumstance.
It's about recognizing that shift from adventure to just living and then making a conscious call based on that.
Yeah, the source really hints that distinction is key. And the blog also covers other things too, right? Just to show the breadth.
It does. The source mentions other titles, like one about Berlin and the failure of anti-mainstream culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a wide range of philosophical musings.
Okay, so that gives us a pretty good feel for the blog Overthinking Out Loud. Now let's switch over to that other source, the one that also happens to be called Overthinking Out Loud.
Right, the podcast.
Yes. This one, according to the source, is by Shelby Renee, and it's on Apple Podcasts.
And let's be super clear here. Based only on our source material, this is a totally separate project from the blog. Just happens to share the name.
Absolutely, completely different thing. The source describes this podcast very simply as personal journals.
Okay.
And its focus, based on that description, seems to be about, navigating life as a 20-something adult, covering the struggles, the triumphs, all that kind of stuff.
So way more personal, maybe introspective, like reading someone's diary out loud, perhaps, compared to the blog's philosophical deep
That's
dives.
definitely the main difference we can glean from the source descriptions, yeah.
Okay.
And the specific episode examples listed kind of back this up.
What were they?
There's an intro episode for the whole series,
Uh-huh.
and another one that specifically talks about testing positive for COVID-19.
Right. Very personal life events.
Exactly. The source also gives a few other details, like it seems to have had a limited run, only listing 2 episodes from back in 2020. And it notes the rating is explicit.
Okay. So, stepping back, based strictly on the sources you shared, we're looking at 2 really different ways to interpret or maybe enact the idea of overthinking out loud.
Yeah, they offer fascinatingly different takes, don't they? One is this journey into diverse philosophical ideas through writing, through reflection.
While the other seems to be about reflecting on personal life experiences shared through audio journaling.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem like the blog is where we found those more specific nuggets of knowledge or insight on particular topics.
Right, like that unique angle on computer science exploring the universe.
That specific view on language just being a tool for thought.
And that less talked about idea of actively choosing to end a big adventure.
Yeah, those specific points of reflection, those insights, are what the sources really let us pull from the blog. It highlights its conceptual focus.
Which stands in pretty stark contrast to the podcast's focus, described as deeply personal journaling.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? We've done this deep dive into these 2 sources, both called Overthinking Out Loud.
And we've seen the blog's distinct takes linking CS to universe exploration, presenting one view on language as just a tool, exploring the choice to end an adventure.
Right. And alongside that, we saw the podcast described simply as personal journals about navigating your 20s.
And exploring these different forms might be interesting for you because, well, it just highlights the sheer range of ways people process and share what's going on inside.
Yeah, it can show up as like really abstract philosophical thinking about the nature of reality.
Or as super personal reflection on, the day-to-day ups and downs of life.
It really makes you think about the different reasons why people externalize their thoughts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is it to dissect an idea like in the blog, or maybe to share an experience like in the podcast?
Yeah, what's the purpose people find in thinking out loud? Is it mostly about understanding yourself or connecting with others,
Hmm.
making sense of the world, maybe all of the above, or something else?
That's a great point. And it kind of leads us to a final thought for you to chew on, building on what we've discussed. If thinking out loud can span this whole spectrum from, intimate personal journal entries to these big, expansive philosophical dives into the universe itself, what other, maybe unexpected ways might we express or explore our inner worlds? What else is out